I'd like to welcome everyone to the class today. We've got two topics that we're going to cover. One is more of a residual of the topic which we had last time, which is the SQL joins. And we want to all practice SQL joins before we move ahead to our next topic. And the other topic which is going to occupy most of today, if I may share that with everyone, is critical thinking and problem solving, right? So for now, the first thing that we need everyone to do is you want to download the presentation MySQL Joins. And this is there in the materials link, right? So I hope everyone has already downloaded this presentation from the materials link. If not, I'm just going to see if I can share that link with everyone here today. So just give me a second where I go and pull it out here. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to plug this into the chat box. I request everyone to hit Control plus Shift plus N before you click on this link, and then paste this link in the new browser window that you open, which is actually an incognito browser window. So the way you do it is probably just hit Control Shift and press N for Nancy, and then it'll open up the incognito window, and then you want to paste your link. Once you paste your link, you need to download the file called MySQL Joins, or if you just want to download, the code that we're going to use today, you can download the file joins.txt. Okay. I think it would be perfectly fine if we download joins.txt. And I need a confirmation that everyone has downloaded that file before we move ahead. Okay, so Atanu is done, Bhavna, Deepak are done, Shravan is done as well. Okay, Abhishek is done as well. Okay. How about the rest of us? Ashdeep, Anuj, Astha, Kritika. Okay. Did anyone have a question for me? I just wanted to check if, let me see if Shravan had a question for me, because I think he said hi. Hi Shravan, I've just unmuted you. Did you have a question for me?
Hi. So, just wondering, is only I'm facing an issue? I think yesterday also same thing. I was, it was unclear actually, and today also voice is actually not clear. So, is it from my end, or is it the same for everyone?
Okay, so your voice seems to be cracking when you speak, Shravan. I don't know if it's an internet issue. So let me check with everyone. Okay. So is my voice clear to everybody? Okay, Arshdeep says yes. Astha, Bhavna, yes, yes. So Abhishek says, Shravan, it could be an internet issue at your end. Okay, that's fine. Deepak says yes. Atanu says loud and clear. Okay. So Shravan, one of the things you could do is just run an internet speed test to see that, you've got the adequate bandwidth. Another thing that I could suggest, Shravan, is, I've sent out the message, right? The WhatsApp message. So it has the ID for the webinar. Okay? And there's an app called Zoom. Okay, so do you have an iPhone or an Android phone?
I have both.
Okay. Okay, lucky you. Okay, so there's an app called Zoom, right? So if you actually download that app and then you take the webinar ID, which let me just see if I can put it up for you right now, and you enter that webinar ID, I think you'll get very good audio there, right? So just in case, you're because you have 4G on your phone, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, I'm using a 4G dongle. But okay, sure, I'll figure it out. No problem.
Yeah,
sure.
no, let me share it with you right away. So, I think that'll make a pretty big difference there. Just a second. Okay. So I've just entered the ID you need to enter, Shravan, into your phone after you download the Zoom app, and I think that should help you quite a bit, right?
Okay, sure, done. Yeah.
Okay, great, great.
Thank
Right.
you. Thanks.
My pleasure, my pleasure. All right, folks. So we're going to move ahead now with the first part of our work today, which is SQL joins. And remember last time we talked about joins in SQL are used to combine two or more tables. So suppose you have two or more tables and you need to combine them in different ways. You use all of these joins. So you have the inner join, which is the most common kind of join. You also have the right and left joins and the full outer joins, right? And what an SQL statement does is that when you write a join statement, it returns data from both of the tables wherever the join condition is being met. So important thing is that the join condition needs to be met. So if you look in the presentation, I've got the joins.txt file, right, which is there for all of you in the presentation. And you can download it from there, joins.txt. Just give me a second. And once you download it, you can open it at your end. So I'm going to do that right now along with you as we speak. So I'm going to open up the notepad file, joins.txt. The other thing that I'll do is I'll get SQL Fiddle going, right? So you might want to do that at your end as well. Just open up sqlfiddle.com and give me a confirmation once you've got SQL Fiddle open at your end. Okay, great. So Abhishek, Bhavna have got it open. I'll wait for all of you to confirm that you've got SQL Fiddle open at your ends. So the fun thing about Zoom is that you could say done in the chat box, or you could also raise your hand. So right at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a hand icon. I think you can raise your hand, right? So can everyone try that? Can you click on the raise hand icon? I'll just wait to see a few hands raised so that we know that we're comfortable with that functionality of raising our hands, right? Okay. Okay, so Abhishek has raised his hand. How about others? Yep. Two more hands have gone up. Great. So that's another way that you can confirm that you've done this. So Asta's got a question. Where is the hand raise option? So Asta, right at the bottom of your computer screen, you'll see the panel. The black panel with all the buttons on it, and one of the buttons will be a raise hand button. It'll be like a hand, like the Congress hand maybe. Okay. So you can chat or you can raise your hands. Both are perfectly okay by me as long as I get a response. Okay, great. So let's go back to our presentation, right? And let's talk about all of the joins. So here's the data that we're going to use today. And we've got two tables. We've got a country table. Two more people raised their hands. Thanks a lot for raising your hands. So let me just use the pointer. By the way, you also have the ability to use the pointer, right? So you can actually do that at your end as well. Okay, here we go. So you've got the country table and you've got the state table over here, right? Now, all of you see this arrow icon on your computers as well. It's a right arrow at the bottom of your panel. Can all of you just use that, arrow icon and point to the table for me, please? Can everyone point to the country table like this so that I know you're using the icon? So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the arrow. And once you click on the arrow, you can come and click on the screen like this and it'll point there for you. Okay. Okay. So while everyone's getting acquainted with that, let me move ahead here. Okay, so now I'm going to point to the state table over here, which has a state ID, a country ID, and the name of the state. So you've got Maharashtra, Punjab, you've got Kathmandu, and you've got the state of California. Right, so there you go. Kritika has managed to get her icon there on top. That's great, Kritika. How about the others? You want to practice and make this a little bit more fun? Okay, okay, no problem. So those that don't see the option, but Kritika managed to see it. So Kritika could probably guide everyone on how she managed it. So it's an arrow that you will see, okay, like this, right? So Kritika, if you could, share what was there, right? Where you clicked in order to reach there, that will be great. Okay. No worries, folks. No worries at all. I think the chat box works perfectly fine. Okay, so Shravan has also managed to get there. Right, there you go. So Kritika says click on options and click on annotate and choose arrow. Okay, so this should be a little bit of fun, and I'll just recycle that. There you go. Options, annotate, arrow. Abhishek, Ashdeep, everyone's here. Great, great. Okay, Jessin's there as well. Good. This is a lot more fun, isn't it? So how many of you give a thumbs up to this tool, Zoom? Thumbs up for Zoom? Yeah? Okay. Great. So let's all point at the country table over here. All right. And there you go. So it has your country IDs 1, 2, 4, and India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka are the countries that correspond to that country ID. You also have in this table, right, Bhavna? Thank you. You also have the null values at the end of the table. Okay. So there's 2 null values there. And then you have the state ID, the country ID, and the name of the state. This is the second table, which is the state table. Now, in this table, you notice that California does not have a country ID associated with it. You also notice that the United States of America, USA, is missing in the country table, right? Okay, so Deepak says thanks, and Atanu says done, thanks. Thanks a lot, Kritika and Shravan. Okay, so we're going to use this data here, the country table and the state table, in order to learn joins. Okay, and joins are really important, folks, in analytics, because when you query multiple tables with data and you need to put it all together in one table that you can then use either in Tableau or you can use that table in Excel. So the way you get to that table is by querying your database, assuming that you have the access to query your database, which you need to get from the IT department, and then put together the information that you're going to actually analyze. So that's the whole reason why you need to have the ability to be able to extract information using the joins, right? Okay. So let's talk about the very first join, which is the inner join. So what does the inner join do? We talked about it last time, right? The inner join is probably very commonly used. It's also one of the easiest versions of the join, right? So whenever the data is matching in both of the tables, only those rows will be displayed in an inner join. So what you see over here is the one that matches in both of the tables is actually being displayed here as the inner join, right? So look at it, right? India, Nepal, and then Maharashtra, Punjab, Kathmandu. These entries are there in both of the tables, okay? So therefore they're showing up in the inner join. Inner join is probably the most easiest of the joins. So you see India and Nepal, but you will not see Sri Lanka, you will not see California. Why are those two missing? So let me go back up, right? Let's look at Sri Lanka for a quick second here. I'll just quickly annotate. Let's look at Sri Lanka. Just give me a second here. Yeah, there we go. So as you can see, Sri Lanka here does not have a matching entry in this particular table, right? There is no state which belongs to the country of Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka is missing in the second table. You also notice that California is actually missing in terms of the country. So there is no country here that matches with California. So what inner join requires to fulfill is that the condition to fulfill is that it needs to be present in both of the tables. And the moment that happens, then you receive the results of your inner join query. So I'll come to the syntax a little bit later, but before I get to that, right, let's actually share a couple of things here. Just give me a second. There we go. Okay. So in order to be able to get this output and experience how the inner join works, what we're going to do is we're going to create these two tables. Okay. And we're going to create both of these tables in SQL Fiddle, right? So you want to actually open up your file, joins, and you want to pick up this much, okay, which is you want to pick up the creation of the first table, the creation of the second table, insertion of the data into the first table, country, and then the insertion of the data into the second table, which is the state. So you want to pick up all of this, copy it, Control C, or you can right click and copy as well. And you want to go and paste it in SQL Fiddle over here on the left hand side in the data definition language panel, right? The DDL panel. So I'm going to click on the DDL panel and I'm going to paste all of this. What all have I pasted? I've pasted the creation of the country table. It has a country ID and a country name. I've pasted the creation of the state with a state ID, country ID, which is also there in the table, country. And I've also got a state name here. And finally, I've got all of this data that I'm going to insert into both of these tables. So I'm going to click on the build schema button now. Moment I do that, you get a message saying the schema is ready, right? Over here, you can see the message, right? The schema is ready now for the query. So how do you test that? You can actually go ahead and type out your simple, SQL queries like select star from country, and you can run that SQL query. So I need a confirmation everyone has been able to create the tables and insert the data into the tables and run this query, select star from country. And you might also want to run the query, select star from state, and make sure that you've got all the data over there as well. Here we go. I'm running the query, select star from state. And there we go. You've got the state ID, the country ID, and the name of the state, right? Okay, so who all are done? So Astha, Abhishek, Juhi, Anjan, how about the rest of us? Deepak, how are you doing? Atanu? Okay, Deepak is done as well. Okay, great. So now you're set up and you're in a position to actually run your join queries, okay? So let's look at the first join query a little carefully here. The first join query says, select star from country, inner join, state, which is the name of the second table, on country dot country underscore ID equal to state dot country underscore ID. So let me see if I can just increase the size of the font so it's visible to everyone. Let me see if I can go with font size 18. Here we go. Is this better, everyone? Can everyone see this query? Thanks, Anuj, for using your pointer. Okay, great. So everyone can see the query very well, I am assuming. Let me know. I can increase the font size further as well. So let's have a look at the structure of the inner join query here, right? It says here, select star from country. So the first table is country, which is on the left hand side. All right. And then it says left join, right? This is the left join clause. And then the second table here is the state, which is the table on the right hand side. Okay. So think of it like this. The table on the left hand side is country, and the table that's on the right hand side is state, right? Okay. And then on country dot country ID underscore ID equal to state dot country underscore ID. So I'm matching the country ID field, which is the way I'm doing the join is I'm actually matching the country ID field on the country as well as the state, right? So I need to define this in order to be able to run the join query, that which field am I using to actually join the two tables. So which field do you think I'm using in the two tables, which is common to both of the tables? Can you point to that field using your mouse pointers on the screen? Everyone, please use your pointers. Tell me, is it the state ID, country ID, state name? Okay, so someone pointed at country ID. How about the rest? Please use your pointer. Which field are we using to join the two tables? Exactly. Shravan, Ashdeep, you got it. Some people are writing on the screen as well. Clearly, we're having a lot of fun. Okay. So you're right. We're using the country ID to join the two tables. Now you can imagine very much that if this was, an HR database, then instead of country ID, we might have been using the employee ID to join the two tables, right? Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. I'll just stop it there now. And let's see what results we get from this particular query. So what a left join does is it takes all of the fields from the table on the left hand side of the query. So in this case, you see that the table on the left hand side of the query is known as the country table. It's a simple SQL query where you notice that the country table is on the left and the state table is on the right. So when you do a left join, when you do an inner join, it will take the intersection of both of these tables. So let's run this particular query. Can everyone run this query at their end, please? While I do it at my end. So I'm going to pick this up. Select star from country, inner join state on country.country ID equal to state.country underscore ID. Let me paste it over here and let's run this SQL query. Moment you run the query, you get this output on your screen, right? Yes, so Deepak, this is we're coming to the other joins right now. So this is actually your inner join, Deepak. Okay, not the left join. This is the inner join. It's the intersection of both the tables. So we have put the condition inner join in the statement, which you can see on your screen right here, right? So as you can see, it's not displaying Sri Lanka and it's not displaying California. Does everyone see that? Right? It's not displaying Sri Lanka, it's not displaying California. It's only displaying those states and countries that are present in both of the tables, and that is the inner join. Okay? So let me go back to the theory here. As you can see, the inner join displays all of the data that is at the intersection of both of the tables. It needs to be present in both of the tables. Therefore, Sri Lanka and California have not been displayed as they do not have matching records in the other table. So this is the concept of the inner join. And it should be very clear now to everybody when you run this query here, right? Has everybody got this output, please? You can say yes, you can raise your hand, you can use the pointer, whatever you want, or you can write on the screen. Okay, great. Everybody's clear with inner join now. Okay, so inner join is the most common kind of join that you will see, folks. Now let's move to the next join, which is the left join. So what does the left join do? The left join takes all of the data on the left hand side table and it displays it irrespective of the fact whether there's any match in the table on the right hand side of the query. Okay. So all of the data from the left hand side table will be displayed, but the data from the right hand side table will not be displayed. So the question is, which is the table on the left hand side and which is the table on the right hand side? So let's focus now on the left join. Okay. Over here, as you can see, the table on the left, there's a country and there's a state. Okay. Can everyone point to which one is the table on the left in this query? Or you can put it in the chat box. Is it country or is it state in this query? Exactly. Thank you. Right. So what the left join will do is, thank you, Ashdeep. What the left join is going to do is it's going to take all of the data in the country table and it's going to show you that data, and it's going to take all of the data from the state table that has matching entries in the country table, right? So it will take all the data in the table on the left, okay, but only the matching data from the table on the right. So let's now have a look at what is the output of this particular query, right? The left join. In fact, you don't have to do a lot. You can go to SQL Fiddle, and where you wrote inner join, you can remove the word inner and type left. That's it. Now I'll run the left join. The moment I run the left join, I will get this particular output over here, right? Everyone got this output before I explain this? Okay, great. So now let's have a look at this particular output and just understand what it did. So let's look at the theory. The theory, basically you realize that what this join is doing is it's not showing California. Why? Because the left join takes everything in the left table. The left table in this case, right, is the country table. So it takes all of the data in the country table. It takes all of the data in the second table on the right, except for that data that does not have a matching value in the table on the left, which is a country table. So let's have a look over here, right? It takes all of the data from the country table, all right? And from the second table, it takes Maharashtra, it will take Punjab, right? Because these have a country associated with it that is present in the country table, which is India. It will also take Kathmandu because it has a country in the first table, which is table number 2, country number 2, Nepal. It will actually not take California because California does not have a matching country ID in the first table, right? And for that reason, California will be dropped in this particular join over here, right? So let's see what output we get. Let me just rub off all of this from the screen. Just give me a second here. So we will not get California, but we should get pretty much everything else when we do the left join, right? There we go. So as you can see, it gives you Maharashtra, Punjab, Kathmandu. It also gives you Sri Lanka from the table which is on the right hand side, which is the state table, but it does not give you California. Okay. So the left join takes everything from the table on the left, which is the country table. It takes those things from the table on the right, which is the state table, that have matching values in the country table. Okay, great. I hope that's clear. I'm sorry. So I hope that's clear. That's the right join. Now you can actually Just a second. This is an error over here. Just a second. This need not be here because this is a right join. Okay. Okay, here we go. So now let's look at the right join. Okay, right join is nothing but the inverse of the left join. So what happens here is, if you look at it, it will take everything from the table on the right, which is actually the state table, and it will display all of those states. As you can see, it has displayed California as well over here, irrespective of whether there's a match in the table on the left or not, which is the country table, right? So California has been displayed, but you can see that the table on the left, the country table had Sri Lanka in it. Sri Lanka has not been displayed this time because it does not have a matching value in the state table. There's no state in Sri Lanka that has been mentioned in the table on the right, which is the state table, right? So this is what the right join does. It takes all of the data from the table on the right hand side of the query and displays it. And it takes the data from the table on the left, which is the country, which has matching values in the table on the right only. So everything from the table on the right, only matching values from the table on the left, that's known as the right join. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this. There we go. Here's your right join. So folks, this should be absolutely clear because this is used very often and asked for very often in analytics, interviews and value work as well. Okay. So here you go. So this is your country. This is your table on the left, and this is your state. This is the table on the right of your query. And what you will notice is the right join will take all of the data in the state table, but it will only take the matching data from the country table, right? Which is why you will see the state of California, but you will not see the country Sri Lanka. Okay? Is everyone clear on this before we execute the query? Everyone is clear on the theory part? Right. Let me see a few comments. Yes, so the diagram can include the common part. Traditionally, Arshdeep, the diagram has on the internet, only included the parts that are matching. So if you guys look at it, right, when you Google, you'll find that traditionally this is how they actually represent it. So what Arshdeep is saying is that probably, let me just show you what Arshdeep is talking about over here. Yes, okay. So Arshdeep is saying, wouldn't it be more apt if the diagram included this section also in the right join, maybe in a different color, right? Like this. Isn't that what you're trying to indicate, Arshdeep? Yes, okay. Yes, so you could think of it that way. Yes, absolutely. Although when you Google on the internet and all, you'll find that almost all the textbooks, the way they represent it is like this. But I think what Arshdeep is saying is right, that ideally you want to represent the shaded area like this, and you also want to represent the intersection area maybe with a different sort of color or a different sort of pattern, right? So thank you so much, Arshdeep, for that input. Okay, just a second. I'll actually implement this. Okay, so why is the null row included in the left join execution but not in the right join one? Yes. So you can see the null here. Okay, I'll come to that. Just give me a second. Has everyone been able to run the right join query, please? Okay. Right. So before we come to the full outer join, right? If you can see, there's a null over here, in the country table, right? So the country table has one row which has both the nulls. That's why it's showing up in one of the joins, which is the left join, but it's not showing up in the other join, right? To Abhishek's question. But you will see that the state table has only country ID null, but it has populated values for state and state ID as well as state name, right? So that's the reason why you're getting the nulls in one of the joins, but not in the other join, right? Okay. There you go. As you can see here, on the left join, you can see that it has the null, all the row full of nulls, right? Because the left table, if I go back to the left table, Abhishek, which is the left table in this case is the country table. It has a row with a null country ID and a null country name. Now, when you combine this using the left join, it will take all of the data from the table on the left. Okay, so it takes country ID and country name. But when it looks in the table on the right, it does not find any matching state ID and state name. Okay, so let me just indicate that over here. It takes this null, but over here it finds no matching, state name, and it does not find any matching state ID in this table to match these two nulls. So what it does is it auto-populates the null values, right? So what is the output you get? We'll just see the output. Over here you get 4 nulls. So you get a null. In fact, everything here becomes null for this particular row in the left join. Okay. All right, so let's just see the comment. Right, Abhishek got it. Okay, great. And then you have the full outer join. Okay, and the way you want to think about the full outer join is in a very simple fashion, that it's a combination of inner join plus left join plus right join, right? So it has the matching rows in both of the tables, which is probably, if you look at it as an intersection, this one here, which is your inner join. And then it also has the left join, which is the non-matching records in the table on the left, the table on the right. So when you combine all of that, you basically get what is known as a full outer join. And why a full outer join is useful is that you can do a pivot on it in a very easy way, right? You can just take the full outer join and you can run a pivot on this, power pivot or pivot, and you can easily play around with all of the fields that you get, right? You get all of the variables here in a full outer join, whether they're actually populated or they're not populated, that you can actually use the slicers or the filters. But the point is you can at least get all of your variables in one particular view, one particular table, right? So this is very useful whether you're using Tableau or whether you're using Excel. This would be very good to have this form of output, and that's why this particular join is very popular. Just give me a second, I'll just use my eraser here. Okay, now the only catch is that if you try and actually run this, okay, it may not work on SQL, MySQL, okay, because the full outer join is not there in MySQL. So it is there in some of the other forms of SQL which you can install on your computer. If you remember the presentation that I used last time, it had an installation process for SQL on your computer. If you install that, you will be able to run the full outer join, but it will not actually work on SQL Fiddle. Okay, so if you try to type here instead of left join, if you try to type right join, you will get the right join. Let me show you the right join. There we go. This is the right join with the state of California, but without Sri Lanka. Everyone got the right join? Okay, great. Great. Okay. Now we'll try and actually use the outer join. So you'll see the error that you will get if you try that. Okay. So select star from country, outer join, state, and I'll run this SQL query. So the moment you do that, you'll get this error saying that there's a problem in the SQL syntax, and it's not a problem with this query, folks. The query is perfectly fine. Okay, the challenge is that the full outer join does not work in my SQL, this version of SQL. Okay, it works in some other versions of SQL, like Oracle SQL. It works there. But just in case you want to work around, right? Suppose you have a version of Excel which does not have anything except MySQL. Then there is a workaround which is available at this link over here, right? So I'll just share this link with everyone. There we go. So if you click on this particular link, right, it will show you a workaround of how you can simulate, and the word is simulate the full outer join in MySQL, because it's not possible to actually use it in MySQL. So really nice example here. So what I've done is I've put it in the presentation, okay, at the bottom of the presentation. Okay. Great. Okay. Has everyone been able to practice all of the joins? Right? Can I ask anyone to confirm that you've been able to practice all of the joins and you're very comfortable now with left join, right join, inner join? Is everyone completely clear on this? Okay, Atanu, Ashdi, Bhavna, Anuj, everyone seems to be completely clear. Great. Great. So we'll take a very small break, not for any reason. We don't need a long break, just to transition between this presentation to the next one, which is critical thinking and decision making. So you can actually open that up, right, on your computers now, which is the critical thinking. Okay, or you can use it on my computers. So we'll take a quick 1 or 2 minute bio break, and then we'll restart on the new topic, which is critical thinking and problem solving. Okay, so 2 minutes, right, everyone? All right, folks, just give me a second here while I get my presentation up. Okay, right. Okay, can everyone confirm that you can see my screen and it should say critical thinking and problem solving? All right, great. Thank you so much. How about everybody else? Jay Singh, Bhavna? Okay, great. Thanks, folks. So I've got a quick question for you. How many squares do you see on the screen? You can put it in the chat box or you can even write on the screen, right? Okay, so we've got 26 from Kritika, we've got 16 from Anuj. How about everybody else? Come on, everyone, how many squares on the screen? Juhi says 26. I'm still waiting from responses from everybody else. Atanu, Jaising, Anjan, okay, Ashdeep. Okay, Ashdeep says 26. 25 plus says Shravan. 37 says Jaising. Okay. Look, clearly there's one big square, right? And what often happens is that you end up counting the small squares, right? So the tendency that you have is, you know, so Mike says everyone depends on what you consider a square. Minus 30. So Mike, you're actually very close, right? So thanks, Mike. That's actually a very good response. Okay. So here's what. Here's one square, right? So like Mike says, this is one square that I'm sure everybody counted. Okay. But then apart from this square, and there's probably 16 of these, how about these squares, right? You've got a significant number of these other squares that are comprised of 4 more squares, right? And then probably when you think about it, you've got these squares here in the center as well. Okay. And how about this one here? There's at least 4 of these squares as well, right? And in the previous ones, also there's at least 16 or 17 of them. So if you look at it, you'll actually arrive, when you put this all together, you're going to arrive at a number of actually 31, all right? And try it out, take your time. I mean, it doesn't have to, get solved immediately, but you'll realize when you combine all of these squares, it's actually 30 plus one square, which is the largest square, which everyone misses. And that's the story, right? The larger square people don't count because when you get stuck in the forest, you kind of you look at all the trees, but you forgot to look at the larger forest, and that's why you end up with this number, which is a little smaller than the actual reality there, right? Some people even like to think laterally. Now, how about so it says this was my first interview question in the career, says Shravan. Okay. Ranjan says he missed the ones in the middle. Okay. And so it can be very hard to look at, all of the data or all of the information that is available to you, because when you get caught up in the work that you do, whether it be a project or analyses, you tend to sort of focus on one way of looking at things, right? And we want to talk about this a little bit more in the critical thinking class. So by now you've probably guessed that if there's 31 in a square, including the square, then on the Rubik's Cube, you probably have 187, right? Some people even count the word squares right on top. So like Mike said, it depends on the definition, right? So here's some of the things we're going to talk about today. Look at critical thinking, what it really means. It's a very broad topic, but how you can actually at least gain an awareness around what is critical thinking and what is not critical thinking, right? So that's something that we'll focus on today. And here's sort of the 4 pillars that we're going to talk about, right? So let's dive right into the first one, which is critical thinking. And let's just talk about, what is critical thinking? So to your mind, right, when you think about critical thinking, what What does it possibly mean to you? Okay. And I'd love any guesses, right? Good, bad, it don't really matter, right? I think I'd love some guesses. What do you think critical thinking is without Googling it though? Let me get some responses in the chat box, folks. What do you think might be critical thinking? Okay, some responses coming up. Let me just have a look there. So Mike says minimizing emotional influence, absolutely. Deepak says subtle thinking, okay. Ashdeep says logically coming to a conclusion, yes, yes. And then Jasin says thinking without being influenced by our biases, which is a very great response, Jasin. And maybe thinking in every possible way. So Bhavna talks about possibilities, and like we looked at the example of the square, that we possibly missed a few possibilities, right? And then Shravan talks about design thinking as well. Okay, thank you everyone for those guesses. So here's one way of looking at it, and there is no singular way of looking at it, but this probably is one way that you could look at critical thinking. Abhishek says something which has a lot of engagement, thinking in and out. Okay. Right. So it's about objectively analyzing and evaluating an issue to form of judgment of what to do sort of going forward. That's one of the definitions that I'd like to throw out there. But I really liked all that I heard in terms of, overlooking the human biases, or being able to take an objective opinion. So what is the difference between that and creative thinking? Anyone knows why creative thinking and critical thinking are similar or not similar? Well, there's no concrete answer, so any guesses are most welcome, right? Okay, so Sharon says both cases you procrastinate. Creative is less negative. Okay, okay. It's a little less critical, says Mike. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any, one answer to this, but I think critical, and I can see that some people like Shravan, have an opinion that it's better to have a bias for action, right, rather than to procrastinate. And Anjan says creative thinking is something new. Critical is more of an objective type. Okay. Okay. And this is just, a question that I wanted to throw out there. I guess critical thinkers kind of analyze and process information more on the data side of things, and before they form an understanding of a problem or an opinion. Creative thinkers tend to brainstorm and use their imagination to develop solutions, find options, or try to look at things from many different perspectives. So, like one of you mentioned, right, that design thinking is also a form of critical thinking. I'd say that design thinking is a critical way of, is a creative way of doing critical thinking, right? Okay, so Shravan says making go for tasks better. Okay. Okay, so here's one way that you want to actually think about critical thinking. And when you think critical thinking, I'd like you to think about the red model. Okay. And the red model says that you've got to recognize assumptions. And like some of you rightly pointed out, Mike, Shravan, right, that there are human biases, you need to be logical. So you have to recognize the assumptions that you have, okay? For example, if a very famous person is saying something, you tend to attribute a lot of credibility or trustworthiness to what is being said. And that is one of your assumptions, that because someone famous said it, it's got to be right. Another assumption is that if someone says something that matches your own viewpoints, then also you tend to agree with it more. And that we're coming to the human bias there. But any challenge to assumptions is very important to think critically, right? And then the second piece that you want to do is evaluate. So Red also talks about evaluating. And when you evaluate things, you eliminate all of the human biases. For example, the confirmation bias, which is to seek data that already agrees with what you have in your mind. Now, if you're going to analyze data that already agrees with your conclusion, then guess what? Your conclusion is going to be correct. So that's not going to make a lot of sense. That's called the confirmation bias. or conflict avoidance, for example, right? So we'll talk about this in a short while. So you've got to recognize those assumptions and evaluate the arguments to see if they've got biases in them before you draw conclusions. And here's a toolkit. So like I said, this is the model that you want to use, the red model, to think critically. But when you want to analyze a situation critically, when you're stuck, even before you get to the point of doing any analytics or analysis, you want to ask all of these questions. And we've put together this toolkit for you, right? For you to actually use and fill up this toolkit whenever you're doing any analysis. Okay. So, what is the key issue or problem that you're trying to solve for is a very important question. Is there any solid evidence? Who are the key stakeholders? So, like one of you pointed out from a design thinking standpoint, right? And which other ideas should be explored apart from the one that is being proposed by the stakeholders? And in evaluating arguments, the most important point is what are the biases that seem to be coming into play, right? And then the human impact of decisions on others from a design thinking standpoint. Now, financial impact is equally important, right? You can't just focus on only human or only financial impact. And then finally, before you draw your conclusions, you also want to sort of tap into the common sense that you have and that the organization has, right? Before you want to think about what you want to conclude, and also look at the risks of what you're concluding, right? So this model is known as the red model, and it's really useful for you to kind of wrap your head around when you're analyzing any situation critically. You feel you're stuck, not getting anywhere, you want to think about the red model. Okay? So before I move ahead, some of the things that you want to do is be alert to vague thinking, right? Such as employee engagement is low due to traffic. Well, guess what? The traffic applies to each and every company in the industry. So that's a pretty vague thought process, right? Or if you say, for example, you have a rambling thought, okay, start talking about broader economic impact or decisions. So you've got to make sure that you formulate the right questions also. This is another thing that I want to talk about. Suppose you want to ask consumers what is the appropriate pricing for a product or a service. There are two ways you could frame that question, right? And I've actually personally made this mistake, so I can vouch for it. So the first way that you want to frame that question, maybe the option A is that, how much would you be willing to pay, right? And the question would probably go like this. It would be, how much would you be willing to pay for this product or this service? And you would have a text box over there. And in the text box, they can fill up whatever it is that they're willing to pay. Option number B to frame this question is that, which one of these accurately reflects how much you're willing to pay for this product or service. And then I could put, 4 radio buttons over there. And let's assume that I have price 1, price 2, price 3, maybe 10,000 rupees, price 4, maybe 15,000 rupees, which is close to, let's say, $220. So if you had to ask people, how much they're willing to pay for a product or service, what would you use? Would you use A or would you use B? Can you indicate with your pointers, please? So all the A's can point to this A over here, and all of the B's can point to this B over here. Please pull out your pointers in annotate. So click on annotate, pull out your pointers, and point to either A or B. Shravan says A. Abhishek says A. Okay. Right. So Shravan and Abhishek and Atanu, right? So why are you people saying A? And Juhi, why are you saying B? Let's hear it from you. So let me see if I can, speak to a few of you as well. So just give me a second here. Okay, so let me go over to Juhi. So Juhi, why did you prefer B over A?
Just we are, giving them a kind of a range in case they are not very sure, what to put. So they have some option, they can choose from. So
Okay. Okay.
that's why.
Okay. And Shravan, I've got you unmuted here. Why did you choose A? Or let me unmute Atanu as well. Atanu, why did you choose A? Okay, so we've got some comments coming in on chat. So Shravan says you're restricting the user in picking up B, right? So you're actually straight jacketing them or restricting them to a few choices, while you could have got far more broader answers or more accurate answers. Now imagine if you thought that a product or service was worth, let's say, maximum $100 and minimum, let's say, you thought it was worth $20, right? But as it turns out, what you didn't realize is when you went to the market that people were willing to pay even up to, let's say $1,000, okay, or let's say $110, right? So imagine that if you had left it open, wouldn't it have been better if you just left it open and people would have punched in 110, some would have said 115, or maybe even $180, and you might have figured out that, whoa, as it turns out, I thought that this was somewhere between 20 and 100, but as it turns out, I had some assumptions in my head because of which I had these numbers, but this is more like reality here, right? So that's what we're saying here, being able to formulate effective questions, explore alternative views of different people, and this is really hard, right? When people give you different viewpoints, it can be very hard to accept those viewpoints, and this is something also that is an important part of design thinking, as well as the critical thinking process. For an analyst, I'd say it's really critical, folks, right? Okay, so Abhishek says you're actually giving them the choice, which is easier for a consumer to decide. So Abhishek, that's the whole challenge, right? So while it's easier for people to decide, you're actually putting the words in their mouth. So I guess sometimes it might be good to give them choices when you're certain, or maybe you've done some exploratory research and you're certain that it falls in a certain range, and you want to sort of make a specific offering, and you're trying to decide what to offer as a price point out of 4 options that you have in your mind. This is the exploratory research you've done. But if you haven't done that, and if it's the first time that you're doing this, you might probably still want to go with an open stance, right? Rather than having a closed stance to this. Okay, I hope that makes sense, Abhishek. Okay, Juhi says yes. Okay, great. So just give me a second here. Let me see if I can get everyone back on mute, right? So, okay, great. So what are the hindrances to critical thinking? And I want to talk about some of the hindrances. One is extreme bias for action. So the exact opposite of paralysis for analysis is just the thought of taking very, very quick decisions. Like if sales are not going well, you attribute it to a particular person on the team. Say, for example, John, and you say that sales or customer satisfaction is low because of this one person. So you sort of jump to a conclusion, right? Or when you think about it, right, narrow thinking, like we should stick to our existing strengths or our existing products, right? That's also the kind of thinking that is a hindrance to critical thinking. So you might be able to recommend, through your analysis, products or services that are very different from what you're actually proposing right now. So you might be able to cross-sell, you might be able to upsell. And then sprawling thinking, things like saying declining revenue is due to company's poor performance, which, by the way, if you flip this around and you say the company's poor performance is due to declining revenue, it's probably going to give you very much the same sort of effect there, right? And then Shravan says ego, right? And this is a great observation, and this is why in the last slide, I talked about the fact that the hardest thing to do is being willing to explore alternative views from different people on the team or your stakeholders, right? Now, I want to talk about some biases and just sort of talk about one bias that is very common in analytics. And you're going to face this all the time, okay? How many of you have heard of the confirmation bias? Can you just say yes or raise your hand if you've heard of the confirmation bias? Okay, so Mike says yes, and Deepak says no, Bhavna says no. All right. Okay, so think about it like this, right? So let's go back, a couple of slides. Okay, let's go back to this slide here. So suppose you say customer satisfaction is low because of John, right? Okay, so Ashdeep says looking for evidence which confirms your views. Absolutely. So suppose you're John's manager and you know that he's been on leave for a very long time and that multiple escalations have happened this month and John was responsible for 3 escalations. He's been on continued leave. It's been poor performance all the way and you haven't seen anything going right. And if someone, if any data, shows you that John actually has contributed to the customer satisfaction being low, you're actually going to be very supportive of that data. So the way it works is you have a belief, and the belief you have is that, John has screwed up my team's customer satisfaction ratings this month. And as it turns out, someone gives you a hazy little fact saying, as it turns out, John has, lowered the average customer rating this particular month, if that's your data point. Now that falls right at the sweet spot of what is your belief and what you're hearing, right? And so you're likely to actually go along with it and not analyze the overall data for customer satisfaction. You're likely to overvalue that particular data point, that John has contributed to the average going low. You're likely to undervalue any other analysis because you already have a belief. Now, foolish is kind of outlandish. I'm not saying that it's foolish, but really this is the confirmation bias. It kind of confirms what you already think, and so you ignore a lot of data and information and don't do an analysis because you're pretty certain that it's right, and you got one data point, and that's it. You're done for the day. You're like, okay, this is perfect, right? I'm totally satisfied. So that's the confirmation bias. But that's not the only one. There's many biases. Let's look at this one here, right? Now, we all know in organizations, it's kind of good to be diplomatic, right? And a lot of people try and do that, but the only challenge there is when you avoid conflict, you actually end up creating even more conflict in the future. So there's a domino effect. You keep avoiding it till it kind of builds up. And what had started out with a conflict that was about this big in size becomes an organizational or departmental argument, which is about this big in size, right? So if you can take on conflict head on earlier on in the process, it really makes a big difference, right? And you need to be able to take conflict on in the analytical thought process as well. So let me give you an example. How many of you have experienced business leaders that want you to analyze your data, but as it turns out, they already know what's right or wrong, in the data, and they just want you to, share a report or share analysis, but guess what? They already know what the conclusion is. Have you faced this situation where someone is asking you to analyze, present a report to you, but they have a confirmation bias in their head already? Okay, so let me get Shravan on the line here and just chat up for a quick minute, right? How about others? I'm sure all of you have, tough stakeholders that you've faced in your career. So let me talk to Shravan here. Yeah, Shravan, I've got you unmuted now. Yes, Shravan. So could you explain your comment, PMS? Okay. So I think Shravan will probably type. He's got a challenge with the mic today, but I'm sure all of you have faced this situation, folks. So, the important thing is that you cannot avoid conflict. You've got to face it. But here's what you want to read about: all of the biases, and there's many such biases that you want to be aware of, such as the anchoring bias, loss aversion bias, which is what a gambler does when they stay and at the table and they keep gambling even though they've lost a lot of money. Mental accounting, pricing biases, right? So you've got to make sure that you read up on some of these biases that you see on the screen right now as an assignment, because we're making you kind of, aware of the stuff that you want to sort of take as an assignment and read. So Shravan says manager is coming with predetermined rating regardless of data. There you go, right? Performance management system. So regardless of what the data says, your manager already has a particular rating in their mind, and even though they're receiving feedback that says otherwise, they premeditated on what they're going to rate you this year. And I want to share this book. And this is a book that I've read, and I think it's probably the best book out there on biases, human biases, and the biases that affect decision making and analysis, right? So it's Rolf Dobelli, and it's called The Art of Thinking Clearly. I would call this a must read for all analytics professionals, because I think these biases really impact your analysis. Because guess what? If you're not going to be defining the problem correctly because of a human bias, chances are low that you're actually going to be able to solve the problem correctly, because you haven't defined it properly to start with. So has anyone heard of this book, The Art of Thinking Clearly? Does anyone have a copy of this book? I'll just wait for the responses, folks. Have you either heard of it, or if you have a copy of it? Okay, how many of you don't have a copy of this book and have never heard about this book? That should be an easy question. All right, I've got 5 responses. So Abhishek says he's heard about it. No says Bhavna. No says Mike. All right, folks. So you will not regret it. All right. It's really important. It's really hard for me to cover all the biases that can impact your analysis, or in fact your decisions in life. Forget about your analysis. But this book, right? It's not too expensive. It's fairly inexpensive. Probably you could get a copy that's a PDF online. I'd see if I can share something across with folks. But you want to get your hands on this book because it is simply the best compendium of all of the decision-making biases and that impact analysis, right? And thinking in human beings. All right. So I hope everyone can manage to get a copy of this book and read it. And we've got another book. Yes, you're right. So Mike says Predictably Irrational. That's also a very good book. So let me pull both of these up for you here. Predictably Irrational. There you go. So I think this is the one that Mike's talking about here, right? This one here, right? Predictably Irrational. And this is also about the decision-making biases. You want to think of the book by Rolf Dobelli as more like a compendium of all of the human biases. It's got like close to maybe 50 human biases, but this one also I've heard really good things about, right? Predictably Irrational. Okay. Just give me a second here while I pull up my slide. So I hope you managed to get your hands on one of these books and read about all of the human biases. Let's talk about problem solving and some of the techniques now that we can use to actually solve problems. And again, folks, this is more about an awareness of some of these techniques more than it is really learning these techniques, because once you know that the technique exists, you will be able to deploy the technique whenever it is that you need it, right? So Deepak Kanoja says, yes, he will read it. Okay, thank you. Right, so one of the techniques is issue-based problem solving. And what it does is it takes the problem and helps you analyze and solve it by breaking it down using the SQL framework, which is what's the situation, what's the complication, and what's the question that we should be asking of ourselves, right? So let's take an example of the SQL framework. If someone asks you what's the most successful Walmart store, right? There's many ways you could define it. You could define it as, well, successful might be highest revenue per square feet, might be highest profitability, might actually have an inventory definition around it, right? So which one of these, makes sense to you? Is success A, highest revenue per square feet? Or folks, would you go with B, which is highest profitability? or maybe C, which is minimum stockouts and best inventory management. So what's your vote? A, B, or C? Everybody. Shravan says B, Deepak says B. How about everybody else? Juhi says B. Okay. Okay, people say B. Okay. How about now, if I were to say, Mike says A or B, right? Okay. How about now, if I were to say that your biggest challenge in your business is the rent that you're paying for your stores, and that's your biggest cost. So now, assuming the rent is your biggest cost, which one would you vote for? A, B, or C? All right, quickly changes to A, isn't it? Right? Okay. And suppose we say, the biggest challenge that you're facing is actually your supply chain, right? And your supply chain is so bad that you're thinking of hiring someone globally to resolve the whiplash effect that you're facing in your supply chain due to delays, right? So if you've heard of the whiplash effect in supply chain. Okay, right, then it becomes C. And so Shravan also says that these are all actually subsets of profitability, isn't it? So you've got to think of the right definition. I think what we're all arriving at is you've got to think of the right definition before you go ahead and do the analysis. So the problem is actually ambiguous, and that's what life is like, right? Isn't it? When you're in a job, there's ambiguous, there's no one set definition for the problem. You could actually define success in many different ways. And you know what? You talk to someone in the supply chain department and they think it's inventory. If you talk to someone, in finance, well, depending on the square feet cost of rent or profitability, they may choose A or B. And likewise for business as well, right? So clearly it could vary a lot from person to person. So it's important to get an agreement is what I'm trying to get to, right? It's not about analytics. It's not about the analytical thought process. It's also about getting an agreement on what problem are we trying to solve for. And unless you do that, no amount of objective analysis is actually going to help you. So as it turns out, in this case, reality was that the CEO, and this is a real case, the CEO wanted, all of the stores to replicate the success of one of the stores, right? And therefore, he wanted a benchmarking to happen. Okay, and there are many metrics that you can consider, right? So inventory spend, cash flows, high revenues, and success needs to be defined clearly before you analyze whether you're successful or not. And that's where you get into the process of agreement, isn't it? Now make sure, before we do any analysis that you've got an agreement on what outcomes you're trying to analyze for, and you've defined those outcomes really well, and all parties on the table actually agree with your analysis, because otherwise it can get ripped apart, later in the day. Okay, that's the whole moral of this thing, is that before you get into a project, you want to focus not just on your manager, your one-over-one managers, but also your client and other stakeholders that might be consumers of your analysis. Well, there's some techniques that you've got to think about. So one is the issue-based problem solving technique. You can break down any problem into multiple issues and sub-issues in order to solve the problem, right? And this is something that we all do. But I think it's really important when you come across a complex problem to break it down into smaller problems that can be solved for before you define the solution to the larger problem, right? And one of the ways that people do this is also identify all the problems using what is known as an affinity diagram, right? And the way the affinity diagram works is that you take all of the stakeholders. So imagine if you've got, all of these stakeholders over here, right? And you bring them all together before you start your project, and you get them to write things out on a post-it. So for example, each person may talk about what are the causes of the problem, and they may suggest more and more ideas, and you may put post-its and put these all together and group them, right? So take, for example, why is customer service so bad? So maybe it's too much attrition, maybe it's untrained staff, or staff aren't getting enough money. So all of these are to do with people. Or maybe it's about standardization and processes and metrics. Maybe it's about management issues, right? And management staff issues. Or maybe it's just infrastructure. Maybe it's just a phone lines issue. So it could be a variety of things that could be driving this. And when you get all the stakeholders on the table, you start to kind of realize that everyone's got a different perspective on what's actually the reason for bad customer care, right, in our company. So that's an affinity diagram. Now, the other way that you solve for such issues is you also identify the root cause. So people are going to blame different things. Maybe they blame the infrastructure, lack of standardization. They blame multiple factors. So what you do is very simple. Whenever you've got many factors and you want to find out which one might be the root cause, so whenever, let's say, factor A, let's say finance blames inventory, and then let's say inventory blames IT, and then IT, let's say IT blames a different department. But as it turns out, what you can see here is that most of the arrows are leading into factor number 4, right? So if you can see over here, you see almost all of the arrows leading to factor number 4. You also see a lot of arrows coming out of factor number 2. So what you notice is that any item with a large number of arrows that are outgoing can be the key cause of the problem, right? And any item with many arrows pointing to it is the main outcome. Okay, so whenever you look at an interrelationship diagram, it helps you understand that factor 2 here in this example seems to have a lot of arrows leading out of it, and that could be the key cause, and factor 4 is actually the key outcome, right? So this is one of the ways that whenever you have multiple reasons for a problem, you want to figure out which one is the root cause of the problem and which one is not the root cause, it's actually the main outcome, which in this case, the root cause being factor 2 and the root outcome being factor number 4. Okay, so think of traffic in Bangalore also. So when you think of traffic in any city, let's say Bangalore, or let's say another city with really bad traffic is, which city has really bad traffic globally apart from Bangalore? Let's see, Kuala Lumpur. Can everyone put one city in the chat box that has very bad traffic? Really bad traffic globally? Okay, so we've got some responses. Mike says LA, Los Angeles, we've got Bangkok, we've got Mumbai, right? And so when you break it down, right, what are the different reasons, right? What could be some of the reasons why traffic is so bad in these cities? Okay, let's just hear from everyone, right? Just put it into the chat box. Why do you think traffic is so bad in these cities? Mumbai, LA, Kolkata, Hyderabad. Okay, one is population, capacity. Okay, so Ashdeep says population, Mike says capacity, Shravan says administration, Ashdeep says infrastructure, right? So you want to take all of these things as factors: capacity, administration, infrastructure, mismanagement. So these become your factor 1, factor 2, factor 3, factor 4, factor 5, and then you draw the arrows of which is leading to which. Okay, so let's say factor 1 is leading to factor 5, factor 5 is leading to factor 4. And the one with the maximum arrows coming out of it is clearly your root cause. Okay. So I hope this is somewhat clear, right? The interrelationship diagram. If you draw it on a piece of paper, it'll be fairly clear to you, right? Now, one of the reasons that I've not heard on this is tremendous growth. Okay. So a lot of cities have bad traffic because of tremendous growth. So think about it this way, right? In our minds, we think growth is not a problem. Okay, so if growth is not a problem, it doesn't show up as one of the root causes. In fact, it doesn't even show up as one of the causes in all of the causes that I heard from in this group. But trust you me, if you look at a city like Bangalore, I think the growth in terms of the population is something like, guys, can you correct me if I'm wrong? I think it's 1 million people or 500,000 people coming into the city every year, right? So it's around 0.5 million people joining the city every year. And that's a problem too. That needs to be there as well. And this is what I'm coming to, that when we talked about all of the squares, right? Imagine, this problem, traffic as the squares that we talked about, right? And I'd said that we're counting all of the squares, but we're forgetting the biggest square. The biggest square is really, in this case, in Bangalore's case, is growth. Isn't it? How many would agree? Right? and then mismanagement or lack of planning, because any city will find it hard to cope with, so much, growth, right? Even the best would find it hard to cope with that. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but feel free to disagree, right? I think it's really important that I hear from the group on this. Okay, so I've got a comment here, right? So Deepak tends to agree with that. And so this is the interrelationship diagram, which really helps in figuring out what's the root cause. So if you have ever heard the word root cause and you now want to use the root cause, I would encourage you to use the interrelationship diagram as a tool to figure out the root cause in any particular problem. Why this is important is that when you undertake an analytics project, you want to be sure that you're working on the root cause. Mostly you'll find that your stakeholders in an organization don't even agree on what the root cause is. So therefore it's important to actually run an interrelationship diagram, identify the root cause, and then start working on the data. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, Juhi says yes. Right, great. Thank you, folks. Okay, so there are many tools that you want to read about, and this is just something that I want to share here. Some of them are the fishbone analysis, which I'm sure some of you have heard of, right? But then there's the Pareto analysis, benchmarking, SWOT analysis, and force field analysis. So let's actually go through some of these. Okay, so Mike says there could be multiple root causes. So this is a very important input, right? Because he's right, you could have more than one root cause. So it would be unfair to say that you can only have one root cause. The root cause is not unique. It's not like a primary key. You could have more than one root cause as well to a problem. Any examples, Mike, that you've come across where you had more than one root cause to a problem? Please feel free to share it with the group while I move on here. Love to hear that on the chat box. All right, so let's look at the fishbone analysis. It's also known as the Ishikawa diagram. And what you see here is you see, think about it as a fish. It's actually the Japanese origin of this particular technique. So it's the, fish, and here are all of the scales of the fish. And think of the central line as the backbone of the fish there, right? Okay, so that's the Ishikawa diagram for you. And this helps you in actually plotting out all of the different problems that are actually leading to the main problem, right? So Mike says could be multiple root causes: power failure caused by car plowing down a power pole and failure of the backup switch, right? There you go. Okay, there you go. That's a great example, Mike. Thanks a lot. So this is known as the cause and effect diagram. And once you've got an Ishikawa diagram, drawn out for you, and you see multiple reasons contributing to a problem and multiple reasons contributing to the sub-problem, right? Then you can actually run an interrelationship diagram, which we just saw over here, to figure out what are the root causes of the problem, okay? So we're kind of working backwards. I'll probably in the next batch have, the interrelationship after the fishbone diagram. But yeah, the fishbone diagram is about figuring out the causes. So think about it as a case study, right? If someone reaches late for a meeting, rapid urbanization, more problems in these cities, a lot of traffic, and you want to understand the root cause of all the traffic, how would you do it? So you would use the fishbone diagram, and all of your answers would fit in right over here, right? Now, if you look at it, it makes a lot of sense. If I were to just put it over here, okay. So let's say, for example, I heard in traffic, I heard a lot of things, right? So I heard growth. Let's say that's one of the big problems. And it's unconventional, but growth is probably due to a lot of outsourcing in the case of Bangalore. Let's also say that it's a lack of urban planning. So let's say UP, urban planning over here. Over here, let's say it's an infrastructure issue. So let's just say it's purely infrastructure. And then over here, let's say it's due to lack of public transport, right? So you club all of these together and you get the fishbone diagram. Okay. How many of us have used the Ishikawa fishbone diagram before? Can you just say yes in the chat box if you've used this diagram before? Okay, looks like a lot of us are seeing it. Okay, so not used it, says Deepak. Okay, Shravan says business analysts use it a lot of the times. Okay. Right, so this is bread and butter, right? And so this is the traffic problem that I was just talking about. The second one is the 80-20 principle. How many of you have heard of the 80-20 principle? Can we get hands up if you've heard of it? Or could you give me a comment in the chat box? 80-20 or Pareto? Okay. Yes. Okay. Shravan, you wanted to share something?
Yeah, so I would like to know, so I understand, we use fishbone diagram to plot whatever are the problems. But what's next is I'm trying to understand after that,
Sure.
after you plot.
Sure. So what you want to do, right? I mean, I don't know how you would approach it, but the next logical thing to my mind would be to identify at one out of two things, right? And I want the wisdom of the whole group. But when I look at a fishbone diagram, I probably have a laundry list of all of the contributing factors, to a main problem. Let's say, for example, Shravan, that it's a recruitment problem, right? Let's say we're not getting enough candidates, or we're not able to fill positions on time. So you've probably got a lot of reasons why that might be happening, right? So it could be a sourcing issue. It could be, an issue of the hiring bar being way too high and the market not having the kind of talent. It could be a compensation issue, blah, blah, blah. So which one would you attack, right? And the way I like to think of it is, well, there's in organizations you have closed thinking, which is, for example, to say that, let's say an organization says that our comp is actually frozen for this year, so we cannot work on the comp and you've got to work on something else. So there is the constraints of the system, but I would like to think a little more freely before I think of the constraints. I probably want to think about the root causes, right, of the problem. So I would want to draw the fishbone diagram and then look at the interrelationship diagram to figure out one or more root causes of the problem. To Mike's point, you could have more than just one root cause that could be contributing to it. Let's say, two factors have an equal number of arrows coming out of them, right, after you do your brainstorming. After that, I'd want to figure out, which one of those is controllable versus which one is not controllable. And then I would want to do analysis on the data to see what we could do, to improve the one that is controllable to our mind, right? So that's just thinking of it, in my head. But could I get your inputs? How do you approach it? Mike, right? Juhi, Jaising. I mean, anyone else who wants to just quickly chime in, I can quickly unmute you, right? So we can start with you, Shravan. How would you actually approach it?
I never used it. I've seen people when we are building mobile apps. So usually people use it. I've seen business analysts using, but I never used it for hiring.
Right. Right.
But it might help, So there is a difference between you looking at a data and you looking at an image.
Right. Right.
I think probably what you said is correct, actually. But I never explored this earlier. It's pretty much in a spreadsheets what we operated as and today. But I
Right.
think this is one thing we can explore.
Yes, absolutely. And I'd be happy to actually, share a deck. I've done this in the past, for the recruiting process somewhere. And I remember in my head how we'd gone about it. And finally we found that, so we were looking at, delays in the interviewing process. So we had, for example, two key concerns. One was that the interviewing process itself was taking, more than 1.5 months. And the other key concern was that the offer letter took a long time to get out to the candidates, right? So both of these problems, right, when we looked at why the interviewing process was taking so long and why the offer letter was not reaching people on time, we had to do a fishbone diagram because it became really passionate. There were the recruiters, the managers, the hiring managers, there were the leaders, there were the candidates, there was all kinds of stakeholders, right? And so we used the post-its. After we got the post-its, we actually put together the fishbone diagram, and then we'd gone ahead and put together the interrelationship diagram and found out one or two root causes, right? So in the case of delays in the interviewing process, we found that the root cause was rescheduling. So we found that there were 3 to 4 reschedulings that were happening for each interview before the candidate actually got interviewed. And not only was it contributing to a lot of delay in the recruitment process, but it was also contributing to very poor customer experience for our candidates. So we were able to highlight that, and we discovered that we were not capturing that data anywhere because the PeopleSoft or HRMS systems did not have any field to capture how many times an interview was getting rescheduled. In fact, the rescheduling was happening mostly over emails or on Outlook, right? So we figured out that if we had a way to capture it, we would love to capture it, but then we ran into a lot of resistance from the recruiters because they were already overloaded with work and they didn't want to input this into the system. So we figured out that somewhere in the future, we would love to have an app that we could use for recruiting. So it became really easy for people to tap, as opposed to, what you had mentioned last time, Shravan, is that when you have recruiting softwares like Teleo, then even looking at a resume becomes a burden on a recruiter, right? So this is one insight that I can share that we've arrived at, Shravan, right? I hope that helps.
Yes, Samir. Yeah, thanks.
Sure. And I'd be happy to, share a series of diagrams or data with you, and talk to you about this, right? Anyone else who wants to share an example before we move ahead of how you've used these techniques? Okay, great. Great, folks. So the Pareto principle is really easy. It's intuitive. All of you know it already. So tell me that if you've got, let's say, a total of 100 items of clothing in your wardrobe, okay? So that's the question. Let's say that, you've got a total of 100 clothes, right? And I'm counting, trousers, shirts, tops, skirts, whatever it is that you've got there, right? Okay. On an average, how many of these are you using on a regular basis? Can you put it into the chat box? So if you've got 100 in your wardrobe, how many are you using on a regular basis? Let's not be shy. It's all what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Okay. Okay. Let me look at the responses that I've got here. Okay. Right. So look at the responses, and they're pretty telling, right? Some say 30, 30 maybe 20 to 30. About half says Mike. Approximately 20 to 30, right? So the whole thought process there is that 80% of the times you're using probably around 20% of your clothes, right? So roughly 20 or 30% of your clothes. And that's what the Pareto principle is about. Whenever you try to break down a problem into the larger parts and the smaller parts, you find that 80% of the issues are due to 20% of the causes. And then you need to focus on the 20% of the causes that are causing 80% of the issues. Some examples of the Pareto principle: 20% of the world controls 80% of the income of the world. 20% of the world is controlling 80% of the riches. 80% of the times you reach out for the same 20% of the clothes in your wardrobe or your closet, right? 80% of a firm's sales come from 20% of the products. 80% of the sales are made by 20% of the sales force. Now, don't take the 80-20 seriously. It could be a 70-30, but the whole idea is that sometimes there's a very few key reasons why issues are occurring, and that's what the Pareto principle is about. And then there's benchmarking. Anyone knows what the image on the bottom right-hand side is? The folks that are pushing these old-fashioned carts. Anyone knows what that is? Okay, Mumbai Dabbawalas. Okay, right. So these are folks that deliver, warm food from your home to your office in the metropolitan city of Mumbai, and they do it with amazing and stunning accuracy. So what's on the top left, the other image? What do you see there? What's the other image about? Right. So it's a courier service, DHL. Now, surprisingly, when you look at the data, you realize that when you benchmark, DHL has 99.94% accuracy in parcel delivery. It's stunning, right? It's one of the best worldwide. But these guys, and they're really, really famous for this, they do not have an IT system. All right. They don't have even any registers or paperwork. They just have a system of markings. So they've got markings that they write on each and every, tiffin box that has lunch in it. And just with that, and the dedication and the ownership, they've got a 99.9997% accuracy, right? And they're a case study globally, the Mumbai Dabbawalas, right? So sometimes it just helps to benchmark and figure out what's working in other systems rather than just our system. And you might want to look at it in terms of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, which is another tool known as the SWOT tool. A lot of you may have heard of the SWOT tool. And then there's the lunchbox movie, says Anjan, okay? Right. So let's look at the SWOT here, right? Many of you have heard of SWOT, okay? Now, you'll be asked on a regular basis to do a SWOT analysis. How many of us have done a SWOT analysis, SWOT? Can I get a yes in the chat box if you've done that, please? Okay, so Anjan and Abhishek have done that. How about the rest? Okay, Mike says yes for a job search. Okay. Okay. Right. So look at it in terms of banks, right? If you ask me what's the SWOT for a bank, and this is what I'd put out there. Okay. What the bank has, going for them is actually the trust and the relationships that they have, hopefully, with their customers. Their weaknesses are that banks aren't all that great at technology, and they're actually struggling with a lot of banking regulations. Can you put in the chat box the names of some of the banking regulations that banks are, struggling with worldwide? Have you heard of any banking regulations? Right, there you go. So Ashdeep says Basel 3. And these are Swiss banking regulations. Every one of you wants to, read about the Basel norms. I'll send out a document, right, to everybody. It's really important if you want a career in analytics to know the Basel norms and how regulation is impacting, the entire scenario out there. And then you also have local regulations. So you have country-based regulations like, the SEBI regulations in India, and you've got the regulations in the US as well. Those are specific country-based regulations, and Basel is actually a global regulation. Mostly banks like Citibank, JP Morgan, or Goldman Sachs have to comply with both the global norms like Basel, as well as the norms for the resident country where they're headquartered and where they have the financial reporting, which in this case, let's say for Goldman Sachs would be the US. And if they've got a local business going on in India, then probably they've also got to look at SEBI. So that's where all these norms become important. And all of these organizations now have the requirement for you to do risk analytics. That's where Basel norms is important for analytics, is you need to read up on Basel norms from the standpoint of the risk analytics that you need to make sure you fulfill in order to run your business, right? And Ashdeep talks about the Frank-Dodd Act in the US. Yes, absolutely, right? So you want to read up the local acts like the Frank-Dodd Act in the US. Thank you, Ashdeep, for that input. Okay, let me just get this all off the table here. So let's look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for a bank. So trust and relationships, technology, regulations, and the opportunities are to go digital, right? That's a big opportunity for the banks to use apps and de-branch themselves, right? Use multiple channels, which is called the omni channels. And the threats to banks aren't really other banks. And this is where you've got to think of it laterally. Today in India, a lot of people have their money in Paytm. Globally, people are banking and they've got payments happening through PayPal. And very soon you'll have wallets everywhere, right? You already have refunds happening to your Amazon wallet, right? And money is staying in many places other than banks. So the competition for banks and the threat to banks isn't necessarily banks. It's actually e-commerce companies, isn't it? So Shravan says payments banking is coming, virtual banking, absolutely, right? So this is a SWOT analysis for banks that we've just done here as an indicative analysis for us all, right? It's a 2x2 matrix. Generally, you'll see a SWOT analysis. The way it happens is the outputs that expected of an analyst, if I may talk about it, business analyst generally, is to create a 2x2 matrix and map out all of these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Typically, strengths over here, weaknesses over here, opportunities over here, and threats over here. Okay. So please be familiar with all of these. You may be required to do it at any point in time when you work in the analytics domain. Okay, great. And then you have a force field analysis. If you think about it, there's many factors that actually support a change and there's factors that actually don't support a change. So think of it in terms of upgrading a hospital with a new equipment. And the moment you think of it that way, you realize that there are things that help the change. Patients want new services. There's more efficient patient care. The throughput increases. You get more patients in and out of the door. And you control rising staff costs by actually putting in new equipment. But on the other hand, you lose the staff over time. Staff is scared of the new technology because it's going to replace them. There is a cost of introducing the new technology and there's a disruption in the system. So when you actually assign factors as a team, you put together the leadership team, management team, and you assign numeric factors over here, you actually get a cumulative score, right? And it's not to say that just because it's 12, you're going to do it, but it's a good way of actually getting people to put weightages on the things that they think will support or not support a change. And if you don't ask them to get those weightages there, then you can very quickly get into a rambling thought process, which we talked about earlier in the day. So your goal is to analyze, but at the same time, you need to drive a business outcome. Otherwise, like Shravan said, it can just become a paralysis of analysis, right? So this technique is known as a force field analysis. And then now let's talk about decision making. So now we don't have to cover all of this. Some of this is reading material for you, but I'm going to talk about multiple criteria decision making, MCDM, right? So the way MCDM works is you have to determine the criteria for solving a particular problem, a weightage for each of the criteria, and then a sum of the weighted score for each of the options. So let's actually do this. Let's do an MCDM. Suppose I want to go from the city of Chennai to the city of Singapore, right? Now, what are some of the ways that I could go from Chennai to Singapore? I could fly, I could go by sea, right? I could fly by helicopter, balloon, aeroplane, or I could go with a raft or swimming while going by sea, or I could even have a submarine. Sounds crazy, but suppose, just think of it that if you've got all of these, ways of getting from Chennai to Singapore, how do you decide which one works for you and which one does not? And that's where the weightages and the criteria come into the picture. So let's go ahead. Now, here's how you do the unweighted assessment, right? So you put a certain, criteria there. You say price is one criteria. Let me show you the criteria over here. So you say, you've got multiple criteria. You've got price, you've got speed, you've got fun. Those are the three criteria. And then you rate each one of these options on how costly they would be, how fast they would be, and how much fun they would be, right? And once you've rated it, you've got these ratings, but the work is not yet complete because you haven't put a weightage on how important is price to you, how important is speed, and how important is fun. So the weightages are actually blank right now, right? So let me show you where the weightages are. These are the weightages. They're actually blank at this point in time. right? Okay, so we need to actually assign weightages, right? So Shravan says, why is the helicopter score 0? Okay, so the reason that the helicopter score is 0 is that I've assumed here that this is going to be really expensive to have a chartered helicopter flight. If you know, right, helicopters are very, very fuel inefficient. So compared to airplanes, they gorge a lot of fuel, right? And that's why we've given it a 0 rating for price, which means that it's actually the most unfavorable way from a price standpoint. It's an assumption at this point in time, Shravan, right? Okay. Right, so now I'm going to add some weightages to this, like so. Now I say that to me, price is very important. I give it a weightage of 2. I say speed is, well, it's kind of not that important for me. So I say 1, which is the lowest rating. And I say fun is really important. I'm actually looking for an adventure to get from Chennai to Singapore. And the moment I do that, I multiply these weightages with these scores, I get the totals, right? And what you find is that the highest total is for the balloon. As it turns out, what I'm looking for is adventure. And this might be very different if I rated speed higher, if I gave it a score of 3 in terms of weightage, or price higher. So it's important to get, what is it that people are looking for in terms of the weightages and also the criteria to solve a particular problem. In this case, the criteria is price, speed, and fun. The weightage is 2, 1, 3, and then here are the options that you're actually exploring together. So that is one technique. Okay, and everyone knows decision trees. I think you've already learned it in much, much more detail, but to show you, the very basic principle on doing a decision tree on a pen and paper is that you put the decisions as squares and you put the outcomes as circles, right? That's the really important thing. Decisions as squares and outcomes as circles, and you're looking for an expected value. So in this example, right, if you want to open a new outlet, but you don't know whether to open it or not, the economy may go up or it might actually tank. So you actually map out those particular outcomes. So for example, if there are 70% chances that the economy will grow, you assign it a probability of 0.7, and 0.3 that is going to decline automatically because the sum of probabilities is 1. And then you map out the expected outcomes, right? So economic growth, if it rises, okay, the outcome is 207,000 pounds, 210,000 pounds. If it declines, it's actually, you're going to lose 500,000 pounds. So it's going to be that multiplied by the probability. It's minus 150,000 pounds. And what you notice here is when you add these two together, it's a positive number, right? And so you decide to go ahead with the decision because 210,000 pounds minus 150,000 pounds is around 60,000 pounds. So it looks like you would actually go ahead with the decisions if it was just financials. But suppose this changes and now the chances are 50-50 that the economy is going to go up or is going to tank. If it goes up, I make 300,000 pounds. If it goes down, I actually lose 500,000 pounds. Now the economics look bad. So depending on the probability, right, that people attribute to whether the economy will grow or not, I might decide to actually open a new outlet or not open a new outlet. And those probabilities become important, and that's where analytics has a role to play. All right, so when you do, get your hands on one of the books that we talked about, either Rolf Dorbelli or the book that Mike suggested, you might want to make sure you read up on these biases. And this will be an assignment for you. And if you want to also read an article, I've got an article down at the bottom, most common cognitive biases that prevent you from being rational. Okay. So you might want to make sure that you read up on all of these biases. And the last piece is risk management. I think the most important thing we want to talk about there is risk is exciting, but you want to talk about it and not be nervous about it and map it in a quadrant, which is a little bit like this, right? And here's one tool that we have to map out the risk. So you look at the impact of the risk as high, moderate, or low, and the likelihood or the probability of it happening, again, high, moderate, low. And then you can figure out whether you want to actually go ahead with the business plan depending on where it falls. Does it fall into the moderate risk zone, low risk, or high risk? The other thing that also governs it is your risk appetite. So if a corporation has a lot of risk appetite, they might be okay to go ahead with something that has a very high impact financially, as well as a very high likelihood of happening, even though it's very, very risky. But it's unlikely. Mostly you'll find that if the risk is really high, people are trying to outsource or mitigate that risk in some way or the other, or really avoid it, because corporations, as they become bigger, they're subject to the expectations of Wall Street and a lot of people, so they're unlikely to take big risks, and startups are likely to take them more than corporations are. And people react to risk in different ways. So, if you look at these risks, the Citibank will sort of default in the next 6 months, for example, right? And they already did once, but what happens if I don't buy an antivirus, right? And what happens if the fuel prices go up, right? So you can react or you can be proactive about it, right? There are two things that you could do at a very broad level. And some of the strategies that companies use is either they mitigate the risk, they try to reduce the chances that it will happen, or they outsource it to another party and let that party accept the risk. For example, when you buy an insurance plan, you outsource your risks, health or life, to the insurance provider, or you accept the risks. You say that's perfectly fine, we're going to live with this. You tell the legal team it's okay, we think we can afford it, or we can afford the lawsuits, and that happens a lot too. Or the last one, which is actually totally avoiding the risk, and that you want to avoid, right? Risk avoidance is a really, really bad idea. Now, you can't protect yourself against all kinds of risks. So while you do your risk analytics, you've got to be aware that the biggest risk of all is actually not doing anything with your money, right? And so you do need to take risks, but yes, you want to be objective about risks, and that is where critical thinking comes into play. So I've got a little exercise for everybody here. Anyone who can connect all four of the dots, this is a fun exercise, right? Before we close the class, can you connect all four of the dots without lifting your pen? Okay, and this is a square. So how will you connect all four of these, all the dots here with just 4 lines and without lifting your pen? Anyone? I gave you a hint right now. So by the way, you guys can draw on the board. Did you notice that? So if you go to annotate and you go to draw, you all can draw on the board, okay? Like I'm drawing here now. So someone is trying to draw it now, okay? Yes. Yes. And 4th line, there you go. So who is this here? Who just do this? Yeah, there you go. So who drew the blue line? Let's see who we need to applaud. Okay, Abhishek. Great. Thanks a ton. I think the message here is that, sometimes you've got to go, you often hear, right, that you've got to go outside the box, but it's sort of hard to understand what that means. So I just had a little bit of an exercise to simplify it and think of how you could, play with this on a piece of paper. So this is how you think of it more broadly. You have to go outside the squares to be able to actually join all of these, right? And unless you go outside, if you try to stay inside of the dots, you're not going to be able to solve the problem. And that, like Atanu says, is thinking out of the box, right? Okay, great. So, hey, thanks a lot, everyone, for your time. Please don't leave right away. It was great practicing all of the joins today. So we practiced the inner join, the left join, right join, the full outer join, and I hope all of you had fun as we did that. And then we talked about a lot of different techniques that really my expectation is that you read a lot, because I think any analyst worth their money has to focus a lot on reading all of these techniques. So please do make sure that you spend time in reading these techniques. One last piece of assistance that I need from you is, can you please click on the form and give me your very honest feedback. So we keep trying to reform and refine the program, make sure that it evolves as we go along. So I've just sent this 4 easy questions, and I'd like all 13 of you to participate, right? So everyone got the link? I know it's late for the folks in India, and I know it's terribly early for Mike. So can everyone please click this and confirm that you're able to fill the feedback before we end for the day? I'm just going to wait till I hear from everyone before I go ahead. Okay, Anjan's done. Thank you, Anjan. How about everybody else? Your honest feedback, please. Very important for us. Okay, and while you fill up the feedback, I just wanted to share that some work is required for you to do before you join the classes next week. So one is that you might need to install a package called the sentiment package in R, and that's important. So we will share instructions with all of you so that you can install the sentiment package in R. You also need a Twitter, developer app account. Okay, so we will share instructions with you on that as well. So far 3 people have confirmed that they filled the feedback: Anjan, Bhavna, and Deepak. How about everybody else, please? Can you please confirm you filled the feedback? Okay. So the things that you need, before the upcoming classes, as we get deeper into analytics, is you need the sentiment package in the R programming language. So we will share that with you. And we also need you to install SAS, or not for the next class, but for the classes after that. So we will share instructions on how to do that with you as well. So one is the sentiment package, the other is SAS, and the third is that you will need a Twitter, account, which is a Twitter developer account. So you don't need it for next week's class. You might need the Twitter account actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mail you all the requirements that you need to do before next week's class, and I will do it tomorrow itself, so that you have a good 5 days, and you can also send me an email if you're facing a problem. So if you've got a query or you want to send me, your problems or screenshots, is contact@equiskill.com. Please drop a mail to contact@equiskill.com, folks. Right? And Deepak, if you're facing a problem with SAS, don't worry, we'll have a doubts class. So I wanted to check that on Thursday, how is everyone placed for a doubts class? I'll tell you what time. That's Thursday, 9 p.m. India time, right? Which should work out to Thursday morning. And let me see, 9 p.m. should be 7:30 p.m. PDT, right, Mike? Okay. So is it possible for you folks to join for 30 minutes at that time, just to make sure we help you with your installation problems? We walk you through the installation problems. No, we've not had a SAS class yet. So yeah, so we're thinking about doing this, Mike, on Thursday morning, 7:30 a.m. PDT, your time. Okay, so it would be Thursday evening. Only for those that are not able to install SAS. If you're able to install SAS, there's no problem. It's not a class. Okay, so it's Thursday night, 9 p.m. IST. Okay. All right. So Mike says Thursday evening if needed. Sure. So this is just basically for those who are having a problem in one out of 2 things. Yes, it requires a virtual machine, Mike. You're right. So we've got the installation instructions to SAS, right? So let me just show you here. If you go to the learner page, and I'm just going to pull up the learner page now. Just give me a second here. There we go. So here we go. If you go to the learner hub, and you don't need SAS for the class on Saturday, but you might for Sunday. So I want everyone to try to install it. So on the learner hub, the very first link is SAS University Edition. So you click on that and it shows you the entire VirtualBox process to install SAS. How do you go about it? Okay, it's all over here. So I want everyone to try it, and if you're having problems, we'll organize a class on Thursday for you to install SAS on your computers, right? All right, so thank you everybody for having joined the class today. A very good day to you, or good night, depending on where you are. And see you next Saturday, right? And next Saturday, we will be doing the regular time of 7:30 p.m. Okay? So it's 7:30 p.m. again, India time. Thank you.